Thank you for the introduction. Okay, so just a warning. This is going to be a long one. This is one of the longest presentations I ever did. So,
How long?
1 hour. 1 hour if we're lucky. There is a moment in this presentation where if people want to take a break, we can take a break. There's around the 40-minute mark. There's a place where if somebody needs to have a smoke or something, we can make a break. I don't mind.
Should leave at 45. That's
okay.
Yeah, for 15.
I think we'll be able to get there. Okay, so the presentation I prepared is the purpose here is to focus and describe a particular set of textual and pictorial talismans that exist in the early modern period in the Ibero-American world. Hence the title, Body and Symbol, Pictorial and Textual Talismans in the early modern Ibero-American world. So these talismans, they don't exist in a vacuum. They exist within a particular style of folk magic. Now, as Patricia said, my main focus of research is learned magic, which is magic associated with literature, with books, with educated elites, with cosmopolitan environments. And to research that type of magic, I focus on the records of the Portuguese Inquisition. However, while researching that, the learned magic, I ran across consistently and frequently with a certain set of practices, incantations, ideas on magic which were extraordinarily consistent and recurrent and existed throughout all of the modern period in Portugal around urban centers. Now, even beyond, and this would appear to be a form of folk magic. Now, even beyond my own research, when I read any literature about magic in the Iberian Peninsula or South America, be it written in Portuguese, Spanish, or English, frequently these authors also noticed the same exact incantations, the same exact practices, the same exact everything happening throughout these significantly vast geographical locations, which nonetheless are all culturally similar. But strangely, nobody was connecting the dots and assuming that this was somewhat of a common tradition of folk magic happening in Ibero-American urban centers. Even though this isn't my topic of research, I decided to pay some attention to this and try to understand what was going on when we were talking about folk magic in urban centers. So I collected all my data and all the data from several books, and boiling it down, this system of folk magic mostly focuses on three main preoccupations. The first is manipulation or the forcing of wills through sexual and domination magic, divination for the determination of thoughts, wills, and locations of individuals, and finally, good venture or bodily protection. Now, good venture is an ambiguous term. This usually can be also referred to as simply having luck, or having somebody having luck in ascending social status, having somebody look favorably upon you, be it for financial gain or sexual gain. Sex is a very big preoccupation in this type of folk magic. But if we boil this down even further, we realize that this style of folk magic was mostly preoccupied with mundane financial preoccupations and health and well-being. Now, this shouldn't be taken as a surprise because this same preoccupation is universal when it comes to folk magic, be it in urban centers or in whatever region or whatever time period. Folk magic is preoccupied with immediate results. It's preoccupied with everyday life, illness, how to immediately resolve problems that occur immediately. This is a contrast with certain forms of learned magic, where sometimes you have preoccupations such as the elevation of the spirit or the elevation of the intellect or the acquisition of secret or hidden knowledge, the dominion of spirits and elements. These are learned magic preoccupations. Folk magic does not care about this at all. It's about pragmatism. So now, how I'm going to go about this is, as these talismans exist within this sort of folk magic, I'm going to take the long route, and I'm going to describe this style of folk magic in its three main preoccupations. I'm going to describe the types of practices and incantations that are used for manipulation magic, the sorts of divination that are used in order to collect information, and then finally, I'm going to focus on bodily protection. Within bodily protection, I will describe the several talismans used in this style of folk magic. Among these, I will focus on the talismans I want to discuss, which are usually called Cartas de Tocar or Cartas de Toque, also translatable as touching cards or touch cards. And then I'll describe these cards, and once all of this is done, I will then present what I believe to be particularly remarkable examples of these talismans, and then propose some potential interpretations of the symbols that are used and the continuities and whatever their meaning might be. Okay, so let's start with this. First of all, from what I can collect, Ibero-American urban folk magic firstly cannot be separated from Catholicism. It is not a practice that is inherently distinguishable or antagonistic to Catholicism. It, in fact, entirely depends on the Catholic cosmology of how the spirit world works. So this functions by a system of intermediation, where the practitioner will call the aid of either saints, souls in purgatory, or devils. Starting then by manipulation or forcing of wills. This mainly focuses on the summoning of devils. In terms of practices, the more common one is something called a fervedor or a boiling. I think about 1/4 of all the magic practices I found are fervedor. So this is the main, in Portuguese magic, this is the fundamental technique. Fervedors are fairly straightforward. You grab a recipient, usually a pan, you fill it with more frequently wine and vinegar. Other liquids are common, holy water, seawater, oil, or spring water, but statistically, wine and vinegar are the more common ones. Then you add a number of ingredients. Again, the more common ones statistically, common ones, sulfur, rosemary, pepper, and salt. I have cataloged over 80 different ingredients that can be used to make a boiling. These are the most common. Then, as you proceed with the ritual, you grab a heart, usually of a bird or chicken. You fill it with pins and needles, and as the pot is put over a fire and it starts to boil, you drop the heart in there. And this, in theory, functions by a system of simulation. This will represent the heart of the person that you want to affect, and as the heart boils, so is supposed the heart of this person will boil. Now, associated with this scenic procedure, there is an incantation that you're supposed to say. And throughout the several hundreds of fervedores I've found, these incantations are extremely consistent, and they maintain themselves throughout centuries. And they, interestingly, seem to describe a semi-coherent and recurrent hierarchy of infernal spirits that are summoned to make this practice. Firstly, an incantation for a fervedor will start by summoning 3 great spirits. Statistically, the more common are called Barabbas, Caiaphas, and Satan. Other names are also common, such as Lucifer, Beelzebub, or the Lame Devil. The Lame Devil in certain... when you're analyzing learned sources, when you find a reference to the Lame Devil, this is usually a reference to Astaroth, a demon. But in folk sources, I have never seen the name Astaroth mentioned anywhere. They just say the Lame Devil. After you call 3 great spirits, you then call second-tier spirits or lesser spirits. The Lame Devil features among these if he wasn't summoned as one of the greater spirits. And also quite common is a spirit called Maria de Padilha. Now, Maria de Padilha is an interesting case because Maria de Padilha is actually a historical character. This refers to the mistress of Peter I of Castile from the 14th century. Castile is the kingdom that today we call Spain. And this Maria de Padilha, during her own lifetime, was famed as a sorceress, As she died, she then, shortly after, her name starts appearing in Castilian magic and incantations as an evil spirit that one can summon in order to perform magic. And then eventually with immigration into Portugal, particularly during the dynastic union of Portugal and Castile, we start finding mentions of Maria de Padilha in urban folk magic in Portugal. And then eventually, this also is transported into Brazil, and contemporary Afro-Brazilian cults still mention Maria de Padilha with some relevance. Maria de Padilha is summoned usually with a very characteristic quote, Maria de Padilha e toda a sua quadrilha, which could be translated as Maria de Padilha nor her posse, gang, or family. Besides these, then there are other lesser devils that can be called in. Usually these aren't given a proper name. They are mostly associated with urban settings, natural environments, or just given titles such as the devil of the slaughterhouse or brothel, the devils of the earth, or the hermit devil. After fervedores, we have something called the devotion by the window. Interestingly, this, while being methodologically different, the incantations used in this devotion are exactly the same as those in the fervedor. So it summons the same exact spirits with the same exact hierarchies. This is rather simple. You just buy some food somewhere. There's an incantation you're supposed to say when you buy the food. You then break this up at a specific hour while standing by a window. You throw the food out the window and you make a request. And the food is an offering to the spirits. And then later in the evening, if you see any animals on the street eating the food, this means that the devils accepted your request. And these are representations of the devils. Also relevant is the devotion to the souls, which is pretty much similar to these other ones, but it refers to souls in purgatory. Now, these, when it comes to manipulation, these are they are petitioned as lesser spirits under the command of greater demons, most often Barrabás. And it's important to notice that in this style of folk magic, there are two perceivable categories of souls in purgatory. These are a type of souls that usually are individuals who suffered violent deaths. They're usually given titles such as, by the method which they died, the tree hanged or the tree beheaded. They can also be associated with urban settings such as the tree of the slaughterhouse, or again, natural environments, the tree of the airs and winds. But besides these violent souls, you also have another category of souls called the faithful of God, which are petitioned by the offering of devotions, masses, and prayers. These are offerings that you do as in exchange. You pray for them to alleviate their penalties in purgatory, and in exchange they do these services for you, such as manipulation. Now, besides devils, saints are also mentioned, but typically saints that their hagiography or iconography relates them somehow with issues of domination and imprisonment. Saint Martha being the paradigmatic example, whose story has her dominated dragon in France. You also have Saint Leonard, patron of prisoners, and Saint Erasmus. Although not directly associated with prisons, the iconography of Erasmus is used, again, usually the devotion of Erasmus, you place an icon of Erasmus in front of you, you call a host of devils and souls, and you ask for the tortures of Erasmus to be transported to the target that you want to torture. And this is how manipulation works. Now, divination. There are a lot of divinatory techniques used here. Some of them are not exclusively Portuguese, some of them not exclusively Iberian. So to start off, as in forms of divination, you also have petitions to the souls, namely the faithful of God, which you request information from them in exchange for masses and prayers. So far, I haven't found let's say, the process by which this communication is established. Usually there's, when these forms of divination, there are signs that are asked of particular spirits that function as responses. In terms of the souls, I haven't found exactly how souls are supposed to communicate with the practitioner. I don't know. Another very frequent divination technique is called seeking voices, which has been in use in Portugal at least as late as the 19th century. You have some ethnographers who still find this. And it usually appeals to heavenly powers, the host or court of heaven, Saint Lazarus, Zechariah, Helen, Basil, a few variations. Basically, this is an incantation you say. You place a question, and then you go to you go to the street, or just you stand by your window, and the first words you hear, random words, you are supposed to find your answer within those words. Favomancy, also very widespread, one of the most popular in Portugal. This is very complex but very versatile. You basically collect a number of favas, most usually it's 18, and then when you're investigating a certain question, you have to have a very good grasp of the entirety of the matter that you're addressing, and then you select the number of favas corresponding to each individual that has a part to play in the issue that you're investigating. Usually these are divided between male and female, and you have to determine which favas are male and female, and you have to consecrate them, and you have to give them names and baptize them. It's a very complicated thing. And then you mix these favas with a variety of small trinkets and objects. This is a list I found in an Inquisition trial. So each object will have a meaning. A coin will mean money, a piece of wood will mean a boat, a conch will mean a church, so forth. You mix the favas with these things, you mix them up, you cast them on a flat surface, and then depending on the relative position of the favas between themselves and in relation to the objects that you cast, you try to extract answers. This functions as a map, and you try to create relations between the individuals and the events or situations which the objects represent. So you actually end up constructing a story or a narrative of all the people involved, and in that story you find your answer. Other techniques: oniromancy, divination through dreams. You give a prayer to either St. Helen or Anne before going to bed, and then you have a dream with your answer. Cusinomancy, or divination with a sieve, usually by the summoning of St. Peter and Paul. Now, truth be said, the association of Peter and Paul with cusinomancy isn't a Portuguese or an Iberian thing. Throughout Europe, you find that these saints typically are associated with this form of divination. Hydromancy, calling on St. Cyprian of Antioch. This is an interesting one, although not very common, because this is a technique that's specialized in the determination of the health and well-being and location of seafaring individuals, so the sailors and merchants, which obviously in early modern Portugal and Spain was relatively important because we had a significant overseas empire. You grab a bowl of water, most often a chamber pot. You fill it with water, you cast some straws in it. This one frequently requires a specialized seer, usually a virgin girl, that will gaze into the water and have some sort of vision. Or you can also interpret the movements of the straws that you cast into the bowl as somehow having your answer. But more commonly, it's the virgin girl. As time goes by, St. Cyprian also becomes associated with cartomancy, contemporarily still. St. Cyprian is associated with cartomancy, playing cards, not the tarot. Cartomancy is a more common divinatory technique in Castile. Only in the late 18th century does it start to come into Portugal. The first mentions to it associated with the same devils and evil spirits as the manipulation techniques. Only a bit later the St. Cyprian take over, and it still then maintains itself to contemporary times. So now, finally, good venture and bodily protection. Largely, this preoccupation is covered by talismans. One of the most common of these is something called pedra d'ara, or altar stone. And this is literally a piece of a Catholic altar. The production or acquisition of these could be done serendipitously, if that's the word. Somebody, when the priest wasn't looking, would just break a piece of a Catholic altar. But more commonly, priests were the producers of these. They would cut themselves a piece of their altar and then sell it as a side hustle. Even if a Catholic altar technically is a consecrated stone, the piece that was cut off still needed to be baptized or consecrated. Usually this was the job of a priest, once again. But there are, let's say, secular ways to do this, namely by passing with this piece of stone through certain urban landmarks, such as city gates, the gallows or a prison. As you walk through these places, the stone would acquire some kind of virtue. Now, finally, pictorial and textual talismans. There are a variety of different talismans that are used in this style of folk magic. Obviously, it is possible to draw certain borders between them and distinctions, but these are obviously academic projections. These talismans all existed in a continuum of each other, and we frequently, be it analyzing the words of practitioners or the words of inquisitors, it's not clear where one category ends and the other one begins. But as academics, we need to make our own lives a bit easier, so we try to distinguish them. Three main types are something called Nominas, magic prayers, and finally Cartas de Tocar. Now, Nominas, we do have a good advantage when it comes to Nominas, because Nominas was defined in the 16th century by a Spanish mathematician and theologian called Pedro Ciruelo. He wrote a book, the Reprobación de las Supersticiones, or the Reproach of Superstitions, where he actually offers a definition to what a nomina is. And this is the translation of the original Castilian. This word nomina in Latin means names in our language of Spain. For these are papers in which are written some names, some good, some bad, and not solely names, but also some prayers. These prayers some vain men and women carry by the neck so as to heal temperatures, tertian or quartan fever. So based on the description given by Ciruelo, these seem to be simply lists of names. These are a couple of examples I found. So if we look, it's just a large sequence of divine, saintly or angelic names: Elohim, Tetragrammaton, Emmanuel, Sanctus, Adonai. Basically, names that are considered to have some kind of inherent virtue, which the carrying of them would protect the individual automatically, I suppose. Now, magic prayers. This is obviously the more common one and the more widespread one. This is, it's no secret what this would be. It's a prayer which is taken to be inherently virtuous and powerful, be it as a verbal utterance or when written on a piece of paper, somehow imbues this paper by virtue of its own words and the meanings they have, as makes this paper a talisman. Prayers are a dime a dozen when you're looking at the Portuguese Inquisition. And these are a few examples. The prayer of Saint Cyprian, and the one in the middle is a fragmented prayer of the just judge, and the one on the left is something called the devotion of the Count, which is a prayer to Nuno Álvares Pereira, who is a Portuguese saint. There is a specific set of prayers which the Inquisition actually tends to pay more attention to. It's a list of 11 prayers that, as soon as the Iberian indexes of forbidden books start being compiled, these prayers systematically appear in those indexes. So there was a set of 11 prayers which the Inquisition was very much aware of. These three are a part of that 11 set. There are ample other prayers. I don't think a catalogue of all magic prayers has ever been compiled. I don't even know if that's possible. There's just a lot of them. These prayers didn't need all be manuscripts. Printers would also frequently create unlicensed magic prayers. The Inquisition was never too happy about that, obviously. Every printing of any book needed to have an Inquisition license, and these typically were published without a license, but certain printers thought that the profit would be worth it. So this is another example of a very rare printed prayer of Saint Cyprian. This was found by a Galician gentleman, Felix Castro Vicente, a good researcher. Those are found in an Inquisition trial too. So now, finally, Cartas de Tocar. Like I said, it's hard to make a concrete border between any of these types of talismans. However, I believe that there are two main characteristics that Cartas de Tocar seem to have that distinguishes them from any other sort of textual talisman. And these are them. Cartas de Tocar, from what I can tell, have no intrinsic power. This distinguishes them from a magic prayer, which is taken to have intrinsic power. Any piece of paper where a specific magic prayer is written is immediately perceived as having the power to protect its user. A Carta de Tocar has no such power and requires consecration. This consecration is exactly the same as that of a pedra d'ara, meaning either a priest blesses it, or then you go through certain urban landmarks and it acquires virtue in this way. The second characteristic of a Carta de Tocar is that it will always contain pictorial elements. These pictorial elements are more typically of two kinds: tools or representations of the passion, or representations of blades and firearms. The origin of these pictorial elements is debatable. One researcher in particular, Rita Marquilhas, her idea is that the Cartas de Tocar originate in vernacular books of hours, which was a significant concern by the Iberian Inquisitions. The control of vernacular books of hours was always a big thing, particularly because these were also where magic prayers were being disseminated, and it was rather easy for any individual to cut or rip a piece of a book of hours, a pictorial representation of the passion or a magic prayer, and carry this with them. So to her, this is where Cartas de Tocar acquire their iconographic tradition. Now, I'm not denying this. It's certainly a possibility, but I don't think that the explanation of the Book of Hours explains the complete range of pictorial elements that you can find associated with cartas. There needs to be a lot more involved than just books of hours. So anyway, I'm just going to give a few examples. So these are two heavily textual Cartas de Tocar. So these consist largely of prayers, and Cartas de Tocar don't need to be a single sheet of paper. They can be several sheets of paper. Even if most of it is text, at the end you will always find representations of the passion or representations of weapons. Even though the representations are fairly consistent, again, consistent representations of the passion and tools of the passion, at a certain point you also start to find symbols which aren't easily identifiable and start to challenge interpretation, which is why I consider that books of hours don't cover all the bases. Other cartas are entirely pictorial. This is the only example of a repeated pattern that I've seen. I have found dozens of Cartas de Tocar. These are the only two that match. So at least this guarantees us that Cartas de Tocar weren't just being created. There was some kind of transmission happening. Whatever the genealogy was between cartas, we don't know. But this at least guarantees that there was something, a transmission going on, a tradition. These two cartas are about 20 years separated by 20 years. One was found in the possession of a new Christian nun, who was a descendant of Jewish converts. The other one was just a guy, an old Christian. So completely distinct social backgrounds, 20 years difference, and the design still maintains itself, which is rather interesting. And then besides these more religious ones, you then have others which, like I said, have representations of weapons. This is one of my favorites, and I will return to this one a number of times because it contains a lot of elements which we can see repeated in a few others that I'll be talking about. First of all, this is clearly designed for physical protection. Cartas de Tocar were very popular among soldiers in the Portuguese Empire and slaves. They were used in order to protect them from weapons, and so you have the representation of two armed men. Does the mouse work? No. That there seems to be a representation of a fortress. You have a representation of the gallows. The sun and the moon, I don't know if this is significant, but they seem to have the same disposition as in the more religious type of cartas, like the one on the left. This also contains a great deal of music instruments, which is rather rare, although music instruments were also used in battle, so that might be the relation there. Anyway, so this is in general terms what a carta is. A pictorial representation might have written text, will have religious iconography, will have military iconography. So now, I have some case studies. The 4 cartas, which I consider to be remarkable, and which challenge interpretation. Now, I'll go through these cartas and I'll describe the symbols that I've managed to identify, but I'll be honest and say that I have not been able to break down or understand every single symbol, every single thing that is contained in any of these cartas. These cartas are still pretty much a challenge of interpretation. So, if anybody feels like having a break, we can have a break now. If everybody good? I need a glass of water.
I believe right now.
But the draws are very good. The draws of those examples you showed. It seemed like a child.
It's not
or me.
You would call naive art.
Yes, it could be naive art.
You also have to take into consideration that they were made by individuals who had no access to drawing equipment.
Yes.
There are even a few of them will have appears to be.
Sorry.
See it, that's fine. Some of them will appear to be drawn in blood. Not because it's particularly special, because it's a pigment that they had access to, like a chicken or something. So, and these people weren't professional artists; they were soldiers and slaves that wanted protection. All right, so I'm hydrated. Case studies. First case, 1637, the voluntary confession of a man called João Gomes Aranha, an educated mixed-race native from Rio de Janeiro residing in Lisbon. And this is the description the Inquisition does of his cartas. That is contained a round globe with the heavenly signs painted, with the sun on one side and the moon on the other, and had some words written in Greek, such as agios, oteos, and other Greek words which he does not know, which paper had been given to him, the confessant, by Domingos da Silva, a Castilian student which today resides in Salamanca. So just in this, there are a couple of interesting things here. First of all, this guy, who was a manufacturer of Cartas de Tocar, was simply reproducing something that was given to him. He himself did not know what the card contained because he did not know Greek. He simply believed that those words were somehow virtuous in themselves, and so this was what he did. Another thing is that the man who gave this producer a carta, this certain Domingos da Silva, was a student in Salamanca. Now, in an Iberian context, there is a certain weight to this idea, because Salamanca, like Toledo, is considered to be almost, in certain plays, in certain literature, is considered to be a place where people go to learn magic. There is a legend of the Black School of Cyprian that was in Salamanca, the cave of San Cipriano. And so, typically in a piece of early modern Iberian literature, every time you find a student of Salamanca, the implication is that most likely this individual knew magic. So the fact that this individual was from Salamanca gives some weight to the carta. And this is the carta. Now, I don't know Greek. I would assume Patricia here would be able to read that more or less.
Can understand.
Overall, this isn't the most complex carta. A few elements which are easily identifiable. First of all, the circle on the center, which is the focus of the carta, obviously contains representations of the planets and the zodiac. It seems to still also be somewhat reminiscent of a circle of Dominical letters and golden numbers, which was a type of representation very common in Iberian literature of the time, particularly in what they would call repertórios dos tempos, or reports on the times, which were very complex almanacs that contains diagrams like this and mathematical instructions for the calculation of movable feast days. It seems to me like the circle is kind of mimicking that. Now, other symbols in there, one that I can kind of identify as that there, that to me appears to be a hand of glory, or a main de gloire, which is a common item associated with witchcraft and magic. Particularly if you look at the paintings or the etchings of Bruegel the Elder. He has a number of paintings about witchcraft, and usually the way to identify a witch in Bruegel's paintings is that somewhere in the painting there will always be a hand of glory. A hand of glory is basically, it's a shriveled dead man's hand that it's used as a candle holder, and supposedly it paralyzes people around it. It's said to be the tool of a thief. Now, this is all I can say about this carta. If anybody then, at the end, if we want to come back to the cartas and look at them again, it's fine, but I'll just move on. Second case study from 1675, denunciation against Manuel Coceiro, a Pernambucan slave residing in Lisbon. It's also interesting to note that most of these remarkable case studies are all from individuals who are either of African origin, Brazilian origin, or individuals who crossed the Atlantic multiple times. This is actually an important issue. Now, the Inquisition describes these cartas as several crosses, characters, signs of Solomon, the Gospel of St. John, and other words from the Holy Scripture. This is my favorite carta. Now, it was two sheets of paper. I'm going to focus on each sheet individually because it's a lot. So, looking at the first one. The text appears to be written in Latin. My Latin is not good. Some sections appear to be similar to, like they said, the Gospel of St. John, but there are other bits which I haven't been able to identify the origin. The handwriting isn't particularly hard, but it's rather small, so it's sometimes it's hard to make out. In terms of symbolism, if we look at the different symbols and we read the words around the symbols, most of them are, let's say, Christian in origin. Sanctus Fortitudo Dei, Medicina Dei, Signum Immobile, and so forth. So this seems to be mostly Christian. Other symbols have words which appear to be divine names, Adonai and Agios. Others appear to be angelic names, Michael, Barachiel, and Cucudiel. Michael is a fairly known archangel in Catholicism and Christianity all around. Barachiel is a bit more rare. Is common in Judaism and I think Eastern Christianity. Catholicism not so much, so it's somewhat of a mystery how Barachiel ended up here. Cucudiel, it clearly mimics an angelic name. I haven't found an angel with this name, not even if I take into consideration this might be a corruption of a name. I don't know what Cucudiel refers to. Now looking at the... Oh, and of course, when we look now... Sorry, got lost. If we look now at the symbols themselves, a few are identifiable. That there seems to that's recurrent in other cartas. That I believe those represent 3 nails, which is also used by the Jesuits in their diagram. Other symbols seem to be similar to certain Solomonic planetary talismans. That there seems similar to the Pentacle of Mars of the 19th century MacGregor Mathers translation of the Key of Solomon. But it's not a perfect fit. I haven't been able to identify unambiguously any of those symbols in there. This is really a challenge, and I'm stunned by it still. Now looking at the other side. This has more common iconography. On the right side, on the top, we see schematic representations of cannons. At the middle, we see what appears to be a magic dagger. At the bottom, on the left side, we have representations of blades and spears, so weaponry that's a little more common than the previous one. If we look at the elaborate symbol on the left side, we notice that around it are the names of apparently 7 archangels. Lists of 7 archangels are common in Judeo-Christian religion. These, however, have some strange names. Gabriel, Raphael, and Michael. Okay, those are the more common archangels in Catholicism. The other ones are a bit more of a challenge, and I suppose that a lot of them are just... I'm going to assume that these are corruptions of other angelic names. Anael is a known... Anael is a frequent angel name, and you find Anael most frequently in Kabbalistic and magic literature, because this is usually the described or taken to be the angel of the sphere of Venus, which suggests that whoever did this, or wherever these names came from, there was somebody had access to magic literature at some point. The other names, I can only assume they are corruptions. Minaton, I can also claim it's Metatron, which is the name given to Enoch after his ascension to heaven and was transformed into an angel. Paphaniel, maybe Mahalia, don't know. It's Mahalia is one of the 72 angels of the Shem Ha-Meforash, which is the 72 letter name of God. And Safriel might be Sarafiel, which is another Enochian angel. Now this becomes even more complicated when we look at the other side of this carta. This is much simpler than the first side. I don't have much to say about the symbol at the top. The one at the bottom is clearly a version of a sigil from a book referred to as the Heptameron, or the Magic Elements, frequently attributed to Peter of Abano. I brought a contemporary version of the Heptameron if anybody is not familiar with this type of literature. This is a contemporary edition by Joseph Peterson, very good author. This contains a few manuscripts. If we look at this book, besides this sigil, which is present in this carta, Anael is also mentioned in this book. So this seems like a likely source, one of the likely sources of whatever's going on in this carta. So if anybody wants to take a look.
Is it safe to touch?
I don't know. I haven't... Ever since I started my PhD, I haven't had a good night's sleep, so, you know. All right, so this is all I know about this carta. Next case, already 18th century, the trial of José Francisco, a Benin-born slave arrested in Lisbon. Now, I'll be honest here, and I'll be following the lead of Cécile Fromont. She made an analysis of this carta, and I'm going to follow a lot of what she said. I don't agree with everything she said, but I'm going to refer to her in what I'm about to say. So this is the carta. Now, interestingly, Cartas de Tocar aren't the end of the genealogy of Ibero-American talismans. There is another type of talisman that appears in the 18th century called a bolsa de mandinga. These originated in a particular ethnic group, the old inhabitants of the Empire of Mali, who were known to carry leather pouches with verses of the Quran inside. As the slave trade begins, these get syncretized. I don't like that word, but they get syncretized with other European and American practices, and they become this nexus of African and American and European magical techniques. They evolve into something called the bolsas de mandinga, which are just these pouches where basically you just stuff in there everything that you think is powerful in some way. Herbs, stones, jewels, and a frequent ingredient in bolsas de mandinga are cartas de tocar. There are cases of individuals who would acquire a carta de tocar, not think it was powerful enough, and then use it as an ingredient to make a bolsa de mandinga, which is considered to be even stronger than a carta de tocar. And this is one of those cases. This was found inside a bolsa de mandinga. So the first, the page on there is a. It's not just this. The carta is longer. It has text. But the page on the left side seems to be largely religious. Appears to have a representation of the Cruz de Caravanca, which is a very popular Castilian devotion, also popular in Portugal, but in Spain it's a more common devotion. It seems to have a representation of a communion host. Those things there appear to be palms from like Palm Sunday. Then on the middle carta we have iconography, which is already similar, a cross, tools of the Passion, a spear, a stick with a sponge with gall in the point at the tip, a leather. Other than this, interestingly, there is the Portuguese coat of arms included there. This shouldn't be taken as strange because coins with particular symbols or coats of arms were used as magic talismans as early as the medieval period, so it's very common. Even in the 19th century, this was still being done. particularly with North African Moroccan coins. They were used in Portugal because they had a pentagram. They were used in Portugal as talismans, and it appears one of the hypotheses for the presence of the Portuguese coat of arms in this Carta de Tocar is that somebody saw a coin used as a talisman having that coat of arms that was just transported there. Now, returning to that previous carta I analyzed, this one also has a few parallels with that, namely the presence of armed men, so this probably was used for physical protection. There are also representations of skulls and crossbones, probably a reference to the Mount of Golgotha. The figure of what I assume to be, from a Catholic perspective, this would be the burning or flaming heart. Some authors want to see in this heart-shaped symbol something similar to a veve, which is a symbol used in voodoo. I personally think that's stretching it a bit. We're talking about 18th century. Let's take it easy. Let's not jump into voodoo just yet. Now, the symbol on the right side is very elaborate. I haven't been able to identify basically the lettering. Usually the lettering are the initials of prayers. I haven't been able to identify much of them. Apart that, most of the symbols are again referring to the Passion. You have a spear and a sponge with gall, but I can't say much about it, unfortunately. So the last case, 19th century. The trial of Matias Gonçalves Guisanda, a Pernambucan freed slave. Now this is a spectacular carta. This was used in the publicity to this very talk because it is remarkable. Out of all of them, I would say this, in terms of artistic aesthetics, this is almost professional. This is beautiful. This is the carta I've spent most time with because it's just captivating. And I can say a lot about it. First of all, we still have a coherence of symbols. We still have blades, we still have weapons, we still have representations of the Passion. But now let's look at things in detail and look at the upper third of the carta. Now the text it contains is written in Portuguese, and it's not particularly difficult to read. And translating a bit of it, it goes as such. I do not believe in God the Father. I do not believe in God the Son. I do not believe in God the Holy Spirit Almighty. I do not believe in the Creator of the heavens and earth. I do not believe in Jesus Christ our Lord. I do not believe who was conceived. I do not believe in the Holy Spirit, and so forth and so forth and so forth. This is a systematic denial of everything that's Christian, which places this carta in an explicitly anti-Christian context. This isn't the only thing that Guisanda had with him. He had a number of magic prayers. He had a prayer of Saint Cyprian. And it is you can make the argument that this isn't necessarily a carta or not solely a carta. This constitutes a demonic pact. Looking at the middle section, where you have the more density of elements. First of all, this is the only carta I've seen with musical instruments as the same that this carta I keep referring to. This is early 18th century Brazil too, and this one is also Brazilian. Again, the only one with musical instruments. We also have a representation of the gallows, although the dead body that stands above it, I'm not sure if it's supposed to be a similar type of dead body as the early 18th century carta. We also have apparently a fortress represented. There are also some figures which seem to be similar, this coiled serpent. These are just suppositions, obviously. We don't have these individuals to ask them what the symbols are supposed to be. We're just going by visual comparison. There's this snake there. There's a rooster, which is, this doesn't need to mean anything. Christian symbolism in regards to the Passion, there's the issue of the singing of the rooster, so that might be it. This thing here, I'm pretty sure is a hand of glory because it says so. The writing on top of it says Mão de finado mirrada, or the shriveled hand of a dead man, which is what the hand of glory is. Then the bottom section, this is pretty cool. It has these three figures, and if we look, they all have names: Lucifer, Satan, and Beelzebub, which are three of the main spirits which are called in domination magic within this same sort of urban magic practice. So this is not a callback, because it's just part of the same system of implicit system of magic. And the carta is literally built upon these three demonic figures. Now, returning to the middle part, and this is where it gets really strange. Apart from all the symbols that we saw in there are 5 figures here. Again, looking at the early 18th century carta, it is possible that some of these figures are also recurrent in this original carta. We've seen the rooster and the snake. The 18th century carta also has these 3 other figures that might be somewhat related to the 3 that we have here. But if we zoom in on these 5 figures on the 19th century carta, we notice that they all have names. Cetro, area, puteneto, operi, and rotas, which are corruptions of the Sator magic square. Sator, area, puteneto, opera, and rotas. This is a Latin palindrome that I think the oldest example of it is like 1st century in Pompeii. Anywhere the Romans went, this talisman appears. So it's not preposterous that this would show up in a magic document, even in Brazil. What is impressive is that apparently the several words of the Sator magic square become associated with figures as if they are spirit names. Now, truth be said, this isn't the single example of the Sator magic square used as a spirit name I found. This is from another Inquisition trial. This is a diabolical pact. So that's the devilish squibbles right over there. And then the pact is signed by a Sator magic square. So this was used apparently as a demonic signature. So while extraordinary, the association of the Sator magic square with as a spirit name is not unheard of. And that's it as far as this carta goes. This is the one I can cover most angles with it. Obviously, the ultimate meaning of all of this is unknowable because we don't have the producer here with us. So, just some final considerations. I believe that cartas propose a number of questions regarding the interpretation or the methodology surrounding the interpretation of symbols or symbolic representations. If we take a completely superficial approach to cartas, they seem to function by a process of protection by accumulation. Apparently, carta manufacturers would just collect symbols wherever they found them, however they found them, that they deemed to be powerful in whatever way they thought. And they just collected these in a piece of paper, and by the accumulated virtue of all of these symbols, somehow the carta would acquire some kind of efficiency. But this, however, excludes a very important element in the interpretation of what a carta is. Now, symbols, pictorial representations, are contextual. A symbol only has significance because it exists in a particular environment, a cultural environment, a social environment, or a religious environment. If you remove the symbol from that environment, it loses its meaning. It has no inherent meaning. So one way of looking at cartas is that when practitioners are acquiring all these different symbols, that they are removing them from their context and somehow expecting them to work. But this excludes something important, which is, even though I don't have an issue saying that when you appropriate a symbol from wherever these individuals were appropriating symbols and you include them in the carta, that they lose their context, I have no issue with this. But what needs to be taken into consideration is that it acquires a new context. We have to remember, particularly in the last cartas we examined, that these were individuals who crossed the Atlantic probably multiple times. They were aware and they had contact with multiple cultures, multiple religions, multiple books, religious books, magic books apparently, all sorts of different sorts of practices and techniques and ideas, and they collected all of these symbols throughout these travels, throughout their extraordinary lives. As such, when they produced the carta with the symbols they had collected throughout their lives, it's not that the carta is giving the context that the symbols acquired is not in the carta, it's in the manufacturer himself. There is a biographical component in every single one of these cartas. These are the symbols that these men, these individuals collected throughout all of their travels. So this is almost like a fingerprint of their own cosmology of protection, of the symbols that throughout their lives they came into contact with, in which they deemed to be relevant and significant, and which they used to construct their own cosmologies. And it needs to be an individualized cosmology because we have symbols in there, particularly if we take a more Afrocentric approach, which some researchers do. We have symbols in there that are cosmologically incompatible, that both symbols can't be true and both symbols can't be protective because they belong to cosmologies which are mutually exclusive. So what these cartas are basically pictorial biographies, pictorial religious biographies, representations of who these individuals were and how they believed the universe could function. With that, thank you.